Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Mario and like always I hope all of you are doing well. So today we're going to continue with our ZBrush series, and just in case you missed it, so the first video we talked about the very basic tools, so like the basic brushes. Second video we talked more about the techniques and more about kind of like those technical tools that we're going to use to complement those brushes. Third video I shared so like my custom UI settings, how you can create your own custom menus, hotkeys, whatnot. And here in this video, we're going to continue where we're going to talk about more of a practical sense of it all. So how to, let's say, start working with brushes, how to work with different sensitivities of intensity, drawing sizes, what exactly are we looking for when we are creating, let's say, designs in ZBrush, and why we're looking for these specific reasons and all. So yeah, let's get into that. All right, so to begin with, here I have a simple bust. So this is something you can find anywhere online if you're looking for it. So even if you start here in Lightbox, you're gonna have a demo head if you wanna practice on that. Technically, if we are, let's say, even add a sphere to our scene, solo the sphere, and let's say just divide the sphere a couple of times, anything really can be sort of like hard surface. And the only thing what we need for hard surface is sort of like clean separation of the plates or clean connection between those plates. And once we have that, let's say, clean connection between the plates, the next thing it's going to be the highlight itself. So highlight, that is something what matters. So this what we see on the outer edge, so like here on the outside, this is already also just fine enough if you want to get started. So if we, let's say, use now clay buildup just to kind of like define this a little bit better, we can do that. So this is kind of like general workflow that we're going to use. So I'm just using clay buildup to sort of like define, let's say, a plate that I want to have. And then again, just use H polish to kind of polish it, so like even further. And then in combination with the smooth brush, kind of like just smoothing out those corners. And then what it also does, what we're going to use is also dam standard. So dam standard is going to be sort of like our panel break brush. So if we hold shift, well, let's say creating the stroke, it's going to be a perfect line. So perfect, like a straight line. Like this. So already this is kind of like your hard surface, what we're looking for. The only thing here where it's going to be really important to understand is that with brushes and with H polish, with smoothing and all of this kind of like paneling, we're not really going to achieve that perfection that we can do in CAD, or that we can do, let's say, with Sub D, that we get those extremely nice and crisp let's say, edges. So here, I'm not even trying to do that with these brushes. So the only thing what I'm trying to do is focus on kind of like those key things. And the key thing is going to be, we're going to think in terms of forms, breaks, openings. So forms comes first. So usually form is going to be this right here. So form, once we have the form, then we're going to think about breaks. And then if necessary, we're going to think about different type of openings that surface might have. And this is kind of like the final sort of like the extent where I like to go before cleaning it up, because this is now the stage that I would actually kind of like clean up and create proper topology out of this before moving forward. Because once we have the clean form, then we can move forward and kind of like create those secondary forms. So basically primary forms need to be clean in order for us to create even cleaner secondary forms. So that's why the huge emphasis is going to be on establishing sort of like these primary forms as, let's say, as precise as we can. They don't have to be as clean. So you're going to notice here also, this is not really that clean, but it's still enough, let's say, for me to recognize where they're going to be, let's say, the most important breaks in the surface, which are going to be kind of like those main materials. So in this case, just two materials, kind of like, let's say, darker separation of the plates versus a lighter separation of the plates. So that contrast between the two is clearly visible. And then once we have that, it's more easier, let's say, to continue forward and let's say create any kind of like new secondary things which we are not going to do like this, let's say now with brushes or whatnot, because I know that I cannot achieve the level of, let's say, clean surface this way, so I'm not even trying. So I'm just kind of like using so like this method to get those forms out really, really fast. And once I have those forms, then we go into cleaning those forms and then working secondary kind of like secondary forms on those well-established primary forms. So I hope that kind of like makes sense in a way, but we're going to see that kind of like in next time. So like I mentioned, anything can be really hard surfacey as long as you kind of like using it properly. And so even if you practice this sort of like methods that we cover here in the sphere, you're still going to be good to go. All right, so how we actually use and how we actually come to from, let's say, this to this. Again, like I mentioned previously, I have only a couple of brushes. So move, you're gonna see it here. So move, clay buildup, damp standard, H polish, and then finally paint is going to be sort of just to create those separations that I sort of clearly see where those major material separations are going to be. All right, so to begin with, we can either begin, let's say, with the move tool to kind of position everything in place, or we can start, let's say, with a clay builder brush, which is the brush that I like to use just to kind of quickly sketch, let's say, the areas that I would like to have, let's say, either the opening or kind of like in which, think of it, if we're coming from Maya, let's say if we're coming from polygonal modeling, think of it in terms of edge flow. So in which sense or in which direction we would have kind of like the flow of the edges, because every form then is going to follow, let's say, that edge flow. And then I can give, let's say, a bit more divisions here if I want to. And then once I have this, let's say, more clearly defined, then I can use move tool with AccuCurve activated. So AccuCurve you can find under brush, curve, AccuCurve. So what that will do is going to, let me just show you with and without. So without it, the move is going to work like this. And with it, it's going to give you more of a sharper tip. And this is going to be, you're going to see here the difference kind of like on chin, where the tip is slightly sharper. And it just gives a little bit more kind of like defined surface, which later we can just fill in on the inside. Doesn't really matter if it's, let's say, like this, because what happens if we can use just clay builder brush and fill the piece on the inside and then continue like that. So again, just kind of like trying to define clean surface like this. So why I'm using a clay builder brush for this is because this gave me sort of like presentation of what I want to flatten or what I need to flatten versus what is kind of like already done. So this is again what I showed you before. Then this would be kind of like the process. So now I have this sort of like flat surface here that I can smooth and then continue forward. So basically for that reason, I'm using it for that basically, yeah. So yeah, let's now continue. So again, this is going to then move there up. Let's say this continues here. And then I'm thinking in terms of, okay, so what are going to be interesting angles in case I'm creating, let's say, some kind of openings? Because like I mentioned, first we're thinking about form. Second, we're thinking about openings. And then let's say this is going to go there on the top. And I would like to continue, let's say, this here. Also, sometimes what I like to do is kind of define kind of like strategic points like this. So like imagine it as a frame, because once I have a stable frame, then I can work from that frame forward. So if I use now move brush and turn perspective off, I can better adjust this frame. So let me actually use here better material. Maybe you can see it better. So what I'm doing is I'm just adjusting this frame a little bit better so that I have those clear lines. So for example, here would be also a good idea to establish, let's say, a point like this. And then I know that maybe this line needs to be more of a straight line. So we'll just kind of like put that more in position, put this more into position. Because again, once we're talking about hard surface, some lines are going to be sort of like fully flat, fully straight, and some are going to be curved. So for example, we want this one curved, so we can leave that one, but for the rest, we just need to make sure that we straighten these out. And yeah, I'm just kind of like repeating then the process. So from here, now when the frame is kind of like more or less clear, we will just repopulate it again. So let's say go like this. So populate this one. This one can continue, this one will continue here. And yeah, because the thing, what we're gonna use later, these lines are going to be sort of like our retopology. You're gonna see it in the next chapter, but this is going to be sort of like our retopology guide. We're gonna know that these are sort of like the lines that we need to follow. So once we have the design established, it's going to be really important actually that we have some lines that we need to follow, because what happens is that if we have, let's say, general flow of the design that goes in this direction, let's say everything flows in this direction, we're not going to do a lot of random cuts like this, you know? So everything more or less is going to be either follow this direction, either perpendicular, or go sort of like in angular sense that matches the angle. So we're not going to play a lot with different angles when we have one angle already established. And yeah, now it's really just that, just kind of like preparing, so like preparing the general form. So let's say like that, and I'm gonna I'm switching sort of like between madcap here, which is going to be, if we are familiar with, let's say, Maya Blender, this is going to be our sort of like Lambert or kind of like default material versus, let's say, the material that we're going to use. Again, I'm just trying to kind of like make the workflow as close as possible to already something that we have familiar. So again, especially if you're coming from Maya and if you use with and you're used to working with polygonal software, ZBrush may be a little bit, like I mentioned, kind of like intimidating on that front, but it's still not that different in the sense where we are creating, let's say, just form a little bit differently and also maybe a little bit faster than maybe we would do it otherwise. All right, so once, let's say that I would have a form like this, so I won't take that much of your time here, I just want to show you forward. So then what I would do is I would start populating these parts like this, just to clearly separate these plates, let's say, with, again, different angle, let's say like this. So this is, let's say, one separation, this is going to be another, this is going to be, let's say, a third separation. And then what I would do is just use H-polish to clean it all up. I like to flatten it, because then with this clay builder brush, I know how much flattening I need and how much is still sort of like unaffected by that polish brush. Because if I'm doing it here where I don't see that brush, maybe it's a little bit harder than to notice how deep the brush needs to go and so on. And usually also what I like to do, so circular motions with combination with Alt key. So Alt is going to give you a surface a little bit on top, and normal is going to kind of like flatten it. So kind of like randomly switching between Alt, so between kind of like additive and subtractive. So let's say a couple of strokes like this, a couple of strokes subtractive. And so additive, subtractive, kind of like switching between the two, more or less. And yeah, so let's say once we would have that, then I would go to the standard brush and just emphasize those separation of the plates a little bit better. So let's say something like this, and that is already enough. So this right here So it can be also a little bit cleaner. Of course, you can spend a little bit more time on that if you want to, but it's really not necessary, because you're going to see later what we are going to do. We're going to just use these to retopologize those parts. So what I'm actually interested is clear this, that this part is clear. This part right here, this needs to be clear, so that the form in itself, it's clear. So once we know that, then it's going to be much easier to move forward. So this is kind of like just that stage, you know, working on the form, making sure that we have all the forms the way we want to. So let's say now we are satisfied more or less with how this looks like. So I want to use polish. And I can just quickly here continue then. Continue to the back. And also one thing, for example, I would not now worry too much about creating, let's say, details like this. So you can, but I wouldn't worry about that much now, because later, I mean, you can indicate it, but later it's going to be much easier to just kind of cut it out. So just, I'm not interested. This is going to be more like secondary form. I'm more interested in those kind of like primary forms. So forms that are defined, and that's more or less with a silhouette, you can clearly distinguish. So that is kind of like the primary thing, that the silhouette is strong, that the forms more or less are in the place where you want them to be. And then everything else is going to be later so much easier, kind of like applied or done. But these kind of like primary forms, they need to be very well established, so that connection here is clear. That, let's say, this goes here on the back is clear. So something like this. Again, just kind of like quick. Oh, so even regardless of how much time you need for this, it can take an hour, it can take a day. It really doesn't matter, because everything is built on your primary forms. So if your primary forms are off, every single detail of whatever you do it later is going to be transferred to that. So if you're, let's say, your primary forms feel rushed, when you come to detailing stage, you're going to notice that that then becomes also not as presentable, maybe. So again, just using a H polish to kind of like polish it all out. And soften. And then them standard to kind of like just emphasize these forms. I'm using Alt key here just to kind of like emphasize those cuts. So again, you see, it does not really have to be perfect. It only needs to have a clear distinction where the lines are and where the lines connect. So again, I will just repeat, what it's important is that we know this. This needs to be clear. Big shapes. Think of it in terms of if you would create these big shapes from those kind of like biggest quads. So this is what we're looking for. All right, so this is, let's say, going to be kind of like stage one, which we kind of like come to, let's say, this point right here. And now you see what's going on here is that I'm working kind of like on a different set of separation, which is going to be, let's say, we are building, let's say, I don't know, here's going to be a muscle. So I'm going to build it, let's say, like this. And then use again dam standard now to create those breaks. So forms, breaks, openings. In this case, we don't really have an opening, but I'm going to show you how I would do that too. So let's say we're going to have separation here, comes here, and then goes here. I don't know, something like this real quick. And then connects, I don't know, maybe here till here, or maybe even more up. And then here, something like that. And then, yeah, then we would work on this separately. So again, now pretending kind of like this is a separate plate, and the process continues. So we're just thinking in terms of, think of it again, building a polygons from those, kind of like looking for those biggest polygons and using again move, kind of like to, this is what I mean, kind of like with the AccuCure active. Doesn't really matter if it gives you this, because what we're going to do is we're going to populate the middle here anyway. So we're just going to populate this like that, and in combination again with the H polish. We're going to slowly kind of like polish these three areas that we previously defined. So again, let's say this one, this one, this one, and this one right here. So again, does not really have to be that perfect, because again, like I said, I'm not even trying, because I know that I cannot create anything as clean as I want it to be. What I can do at least is create a clean separation for those plates, so that at least those big forms are clearly visible. That I can do just by using brushes. And then everything else we're going to build on top. So again, yeah, just process continues. Just cleaning it up as we go. Because now what you see here, we have one surface, second surface, third surface. And we're just kind of like polishing these and kind of like building form on top. And again, just making sure that more or less the form is also... Sometimes it's also be good to work in a non-perspective mode. And there we go. So I don't want to take that much of your time, but I think you get kind of like what I'm trying to do here. So just making these parts clean, and again, process now continues. So slowly, and then I would increase maybe the divisions. So again, one more division up. And again, just polish. Define the cuts. And polish again. So again, very kind of like simplistic approach. Like I mentioned, what I like to do, I do like to work kind of like full screen, so I have no distractions, and then every single tool that I need anyway is kind of like on here. And at this point, really, I'm not thinking about anything technical, but yeah, more or less, then this is kind of like going to be approach for this. And then we come to those openings. So again, not creating anything too special here, just again to save us some time. This is going to be, let's say, the arm opening. And again, you see, I'm not even trying to create a clean cut or anything, because we're going to still clean that later. And again, just kind of like, okay, so let's say till here, we're going to connect it. Let's say here, and then move it down. So let's say this is going to be our biggest opening, and then let's disconnect, let's say here. And actually this is going to be kind of like our biggest, so like break for the surface. So like this. And then process continues forward. So again, just kind of like defining the area between the break. Say defining, this is going to be, let's say, that muscle. Making sure that everything is kind of like more or less evened out. Smoothing it out. And then from here, I can create, let's say, a new break, which is going to be following this line. So this line and then the break will come around here somewhere, like following those specific lines. And again, do not be, let's say, too worried about the shape. You can smooth everything if you want to. So even if you created openings, you can smooth that out and then just redo them again. It's really, this is the phase where you can really be as loose as you can be, because if you get kind of like too worried about eyes, um, it's not really perfectly aligned or it's not really perfectly clean. It's going to be hard, very hard to achieve it in this, let's say, state, because this is now just for the forms. Later, we're going to clean this up and prepare it for secondary forms. So anything, if we need to still kind of like move into place or redefine the forms differently, this is still kind of like that part of the stage where we can do that, where we can just kind of like put everything into, let's say, better perspective. So I won't take that much of your time here because the process kind of like repeats itself. So I'm just going to move to this one, which again, this is kind of like, again, it may take you an hour, it may take you a day. It doesn't really matter. What matters the most is that your forms are clean, so that the forms are clearly defined. So like in this case, we have clearly defined forms. And then once we have, let's say, those clearly defined forms, then we move on sort of like those breaks. For example, like you saw here, I will just now use dem standard and define a break. Let's say this is going to be that, let's say the main panel break, like this, where it's going to be that big shape. So, and then that shape is going to continue down. And this is going to be, let's say, that big separations. I'm not really now concerned with small separations. I'm not concerned about details like this. So if you want to kind of like play with the sketches and detail it for yourself, you can. Now here's the thing. I'm going to show you now something really quick. What I like to do. So now the next stage is going to be the cleanup. So the cleanup is going to be that we have clean topology for this primary forms, because what we're going to do after that, like I said, I'm not even trying to create anything clean here because I know that I cannot, but what I can do is have a clean primary forms so that I can use alphas to define my secondary shapes on top of those clean forms, because alphas are actually going to give me that secondary forms that I might struggle generally a lot otherwise. So alphas, we're going to talk also a bit later how you can create alphas in your own. But basically with alphas, what I did is in Maya just created parts that I like to use often, design style that I like to use often. Mainly that is kind of like automotive design inspiration. And I would just create parts from the cars or bikes or whatever I like. And then I would just transfer it kind of like through alpha and then work on those kind of like secondary forms after the primary form is sort of like cleaned up. So I'm going to show you the complete workflow in the next video, but for now we're going to just stick to this. So once I would have this, then I would use paintbrush. So if you go to B for brush, I have this on my own custom hotkeys. So I'm going to use Control 3, and if you hit P, you're going to find paintbrush. So with paintbrush, you can just use and paint any color here. So if we switch colors, you're going to see that now I'm going to get different color. And if we go into preferences, and if we go in under, it's going to be tablet here, use tablet off. So I have that also on, as part of my custom menu. So use tablet off. It's also useful for masking. So you get full mask. And now once I have my paintbrush, then I can paint those big plates. So this is going to be, let's say, that big material separation. Thing is also, let me just show you that one thing, that, let me undo all of this. Sometimes I would actually what I'm trying to say is that sometimes I wouldn't really do cuts with them standard, but sometimes I would just go directly and paint where I would like to have my openings. So kind of like this. And then based on those kind of like paintings or based on the color difference, then I would create the openings. Because sometimes it's going to be much easier to use the color itself, because our eyes may be going to find those kind of like separations a little bit more easier than if you would use, let's say, those brushes and kind of like go directly kind of like where we think that separations might be cool. But if we use, let's say, color like this, then we can clearly just define those separations a little bit better. So you can just delete here the parts that I want. And then later, let's say I can create now a different copy. I can duplicate this, or polypaint is going to be also turned off by here if you don't want to see it. But I can go now more deeper, let's say, and try to think about, I don't know, where I would like to have those secondary forms or whatnot. So let's say here, if I'm going to work something on the back, how that might look like. I don't know if I decide to go that route. So, but this is again not necessary. All of this is kind of like those secondary forms. So all of this, for example, if you do now this kind of stuff, this is secondary forms. This does not really, you can kind of like sketch it for yourself if you want to, just kind of like to visualize what you would like to have. But usually I like to focus on big forms, meaning this is a big form. And maybe I can indicate, okay, this is secondary form or secondary detail that I would like to have there. And then same thing, let's say muscle. I know it's going to be, let's say, also a darker tone. But as you notice here, the complete workflow in the beginning is just going to be kind of like rough form, but again, at the same time with clear sort of like idea of separation where you want to have different, let's say, materials. So we talked about form, we talked about breaks, but we did not talk about opening. So what I mean by opening, I'm going to show you that now. So, okay, this is going to be, let's say, actually all of this can be one material. Then here you can see now, for example, if your design is working. So if you put this maybe a bit too far, you don't like it, you can always just quickly kind of like readjust it. So like this. And you don't need to worry about now creating a clean dam standard, so like fall off or anything like that. Same thing goes with, again, this would be another secondary form. If I now try to now kind of like think, okay, where the eyes could go, or I don't know, some kind of opening, this would be so like that secondary form where I'm just going to give me, let's say, an idea or a direction where I would like to go, but I will not go there just yet. All right, so this would be kind of like a form. The second thing, like I mentioned, would be those kind of like secondary. So forms we have, breaks we have too. And now what I mean by openings is going to be, let's say this. So I'm going to use masking. And also you can either now create a duplicate, or you can go under layers and create a new layer. So what layers is going to do is you can then delete the layer if you don't like, let's say, form. So I'm just going to show you something quick. So let's say we create something like this under layer. And if we don't like that, we can just delete the layer. So we still maintain our form, at least in the early stages. Later you can use layers for other stuff too, or you can simply now create a duplicate, because now what we are doing is actually destroying this form a little bit, but giving us sort of like an idea of what type of an opening, let's say, I would like to have. So I would go something like this. And this is now masking. So I would just use mask, holding Control. To mask all this part here. Again, it doesn't have to be clean. You see here that I'm not really now overly concerned how clean lines here are, because it doesn't really make much of a difference in this stage. I just need quick idea out, and then just quickly invert the mask. I would use E to use this move tool. Again, unlock it, position it into the unmask part, and then I would create, let's say, an opening like this. just again to indicate where I would like to have that opening. And also I can work maybe only on one side and mirror it back, but it's for this purpose, it's just fine. Okay, just again, quick demonstration, and I can also dynamesh it real quick with higher resolution. And then use mirror, not mirror, but H polish, just to kind of like polish this area, but making sure that my use tablet is on. Again, doesn't have to be really clean. It's more like indication. Now it's really kind of like I'm thinking in terms of already secondary forms or where I would like to have my opening, and then go back into my, let's say, paintbrush. Tablet on. And this is going to be, let's say, that, again, darker tone. So this is something that we will not retopologize. This is more kind of like a visual aid that we can either save. So if we created a duplicate, then I will, let's say, save this because everything, anyway, I'm creating a save for every big, let's say, shape difference. So every time when a shape changes, for example, forms, breaks, openings, for this shape here, I would now create a save. And I can also, let's say, use this as a screenshot to have it, I don't know, next to me or whatever. And then while I'm creating, let's say, cleaner version, I can position this maybe a little bit better and whatnot. But now I know, all right, so major forms are going to be these, major openings are going to be here. I can also create the same thing, let's say here. So now the next step after this video, so I'm going to show you, so this is going to be kind of like my sort of like hybrid workflow where I'm going to use Maya to now create a cleaner version of all of this. So just kind of like retopologize these forms based on what we established here. So let's say kind of like following this guide. So you're going to see that in the next video. And then after we would have that, then I would bring it back into ZBrush. Then we would use all these alphas for secondary form. First, I'm going to show you this sort of like hybrid workflow where I'm cleaning it up in Maya. And then later in the following videos after that, we're going to cover techniques, how we can do all of that in ZBrush. And I'm not using that often ZRemesher for this kind of things. And I'm going to also show you later reason why I don't use it. Because sometimes with the ZRemesher, I can quickly explain it here, but I'm going to show you actually later why I don't use it that often. Because sometimes with ZRemesher, you are on a kind of like working on algorithm, and sometimes algorithm will not give you desired geometry. So sometimes when you have, let's say, when you really want to have something smooth, let's say I'm working with a head and I want to have a top of the head, where's that clean? So let's say the top of the head, I want to have really smooth. With ZRemesher, sometimes what may happen, that's going to create a pulse in some specific parts like this, which regardless of how much smoothing you use, it's still going to show you those poles like that. So for that reason, I prefer kind of like manual sort of like retopology on these big forms, and then use creases kind of like to position everything in place. But you're going to see actually the full workflow in kind of like the following video. This is going to be kind of like my preferred sort of like hybrid workflow using ZBrush and Maya. But as we move forward, I'm going to also show you how you can do it entirely in ZBrush, how you can retopologize and also use ZRemesher to maintain the forms, is if again that is going to be your desired workflow. So you can always see kind of like all approaches and then simply decide on yourself which one you prefer or which one you might take. So when I say retopology, I understand probably that might scare some of you, but I assure you that it's not retopology what you think, because retopology that we're going to use here is going to be in extremely big chunks. So that means that we are not going to retopologize. Let me just quickly show you. We are not going to retopologize something like this. We're not going to do this type of retopology. So just again to assure you, you don't have to worry about that. So this is not what we're going to do. What we're going to do instead is going to be big chunks. So it's going to be more something like this. So this is the retopology that we're going to do. So big chunks, big parts, and that's it. So you don't have to worry about, I don't know, even if you don't understand anything about edge flow, you still can use that method. So yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to see the full workflow in the following videos. So yeah, if you have any questions, like always, feel free to ask anything. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to see you next time.